change the slide.
We're going to change the slide there.
Da, 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 da.
Yeah, and just talk for a few minutes about it here. I just wanted to give a shout out. Thank you, Nicole, for commenting on. So Nicole says that she found that knowing her target audience and the problem she was wanting to solve really well helps give her, I'm trying to change pronouns on the fly, it helps give her a gut feeling of what features she needs to focus on. And when she's listened to advisors or developers telling her something else is more important, that's when things get misaligned. So trusting herself and that she knows her market really well helps me to keep focusing on them. So yeah, understanding your market is incredibly important. You're the best person to know, nobody else has the responsibility to know your market except for yourself. That also though means you need to be mindful of your blind spots and be willing to at least consider outside advice.
And especially as a non-technical founder.
Exactly.
Having that translation of, is my vision doable? Is it doable within the constraints of time, money, technology?
Yeah.
You have to have that feedback.
Yeah. So we'll shift and start talking about lean, like a lean startup type of mentality, lean MVP versus what we're calling build and test.
Which some would argue are also
They're
the same thing.
They're the same thing.
All of the, I mean, maybe that's a place to start.
Yeah.
I think with everything that you read and other people's experiences and things that you listen to, and us completely included, they're just other people's experience and their perspective. And that might be from their own personal experience of a journey. It might be from theory and research that they've done, and all of which can give you something to take away. It can also do the opposite. You can listen and say, that's definitely what I know I do not want to do. And that can still be beneficial. So I think with all of it, it's based on your context. It's based on your personality and the team that you have around you, what methodology is right for you. But I guess with that as a proviso, we can jump in.
So if you're just joining us and you haven't seen us or heard us before, we are taking a business idea, taking it from zero to revenue in a week. We've already hit revenue, you can see above, so that's been awesome to see, and we're only on day 3. The product that we're building is called Briefing Room, and it's, do you want to try and explain it? We're trying to riff on the pitch.
We're iterating live.
Iterating live, yes, exactly.
So you'll be our validated learning for part of this. So Briefing Room is a space where you can keep your investors up to date. I'm going to definitely have to work on that. Yeah. It's going to help you engage your investors better. So it's all about making sure that you know what information to share, that you can share it in a really beautiful and simple way. It doesn't take too much of your time, but essentially you're building and nurturing that investor relationship, because ultimately your investors can be your best advocates for your business.
So a lot of people, when listening to what we've been working on, they'll say, hang on, so you're coming up with an idea, you haven't tested the idea, and you're going to build an actual, like when we say MVP, you are going to be able to use this, you're going to be able to sign up and start using it fully right away by the end of the week. That is,
which isn't a true to form MVP.
No, it is. It is not. It's more than an MVP in that it could. It's going to be a business by the end of the week, whether we like it or not, right?
But I guess you could argue is that, so MVP, minimum viable product, for us, because of the time boxing, that actually has been pretty, I mean, not that this week hasn't been a challenge, but it's been pretty minimum in terms of, you're talking about a time sink and the amount that you're putting into something. It's going to be usable, it's going to be viable because people will be paying and using it and able to use its functions, but we haven't spent a whole lot of time on it.
Sure, but what would somebody assume that we should be doing? If we were doing things the right way, what would that have looked like when trying to look at this problem?
So would we start with our customer discovery? We would look at the target market. We would do a lot of interviews and questionnaires with them to try and identify a problem.
Before we build anything?
Before we build anything.
Okay.
I think so. And then you would start wireframing. So you would have identified the problem, the one problem that you wanted to solve, and you would be pitching your solution, and you would, like, we've actually got the book somewhere up here, but if you've read the book Sprint, it's a really good example of being able to run a design sprint, and that's where you could easily start. So it's 1 week, kind of like what we're doing. Nicely done.
Boom.
But by the end of it, you don't even have an MVP, right? it's wireframed, it's concierging it, so that means you're trying to solve the problem in any particular way. You might not even use technology. You could literally have people using pieces of paper and saying, I think I would do this, and then I would do this, and giving you feedback, and you would be gleaning information from those user tests, essentially, would be your starting point.
Yeah, like good examples of MVPs that could also be businesses, like non-technical MVPs. Let's say you were creating a community, right? You want to create a community for people who are interested in knitting. But you really think that you're going to create a platform for knitters to engage with each other. Do you go off and hire a development team and build a custom-made community platform for knitters, or do you validate that there exists that community and that need for the specific features that you think that knitters need that aren't catered to on things like Mighty Networks and Slack first?
Right. So instead of saying, I've got an idea for an all singing, all dancing knitting platform, and we're going to be able to share our knitting, I was going to call them recipes. What do you call them? The things that tell you how to knit what you knit. Pattern. It's a pattern. So we're going to share our knitting patterns. We're going to share the outcome of what our projects are. We're going to track like how many days we've knitted in a row, so we can be like building a chain, accountability buddies. We're going to have a system all around the world.
Threaded discussions.
Essentially all of that. You could sell your wool from the llamas or alpacas, whatever. But instead of doing all of that, can you show that actually currently I'm using a Facebook group to do this, and there are this many people using it, and they keep on asking me for this kind of stuff. So like you said, can you validate that in a really pen and paper way?
Yeah, exactly. So especially with Kendaba, what we did was we made an MVP, a technical MVP, in a couple months. But before that, for about a year, we actually were using Slack as our internal test to see if engagement was where we thought it was. So our big question at the beginning was, if we could get a family onto a platform, would they use it? Would they keep using it? Would they just drift and start using other tools that they use elsewhere, or are they okay with using like their own thing? So we tried it with a couple of test families, and we watched. We didn't spend any money. We didn't do anything we didn't start building our platform or any of that. And even then, we had to build 3 iterations of our platform. But the fundamental thing that we were using Slack to test was able to be validated without creating our own kind of community platform first.
Because that can be the temptation. I've got an idea. It's going to look like this, and I need money to build it.
It has to be branded, and it has to be mine.
Right, and the first step being, well, you can do so much without money to be able to prove that.
Yeah, and also just know what is the business or what is the thing that you're actually wanting to create. You know, some people will say, I want to create a community for great content and about knitting, right? I want to make a knitting community. Okay, so is the business a knitting community, or is the business a tech product that manages that? For knitters, are you kind of a tech company or a community company? Because if you're a community company, well, go check out Mighty Networks. Go check out Podia is another one. And there are these platforms, software as a service platforms, that have done all this legwork for you that you might actually be able to use and custom brand and all that kind of stuff. But that sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable. They're like, but it needs to do this specific thing. And the question is, does it actually need to do that specific thing? Do you really need a custom accountability system, tracking system for knitters? Maybe you do, but use it and then use something else and get frustrated by the fact that you can't have that thing. And that tells you, and everybody's saying, man, I really wish we could do X, Y, and Z. That gives you a core data-backed reason to say, we're going to spend some money and actually build this.
And what are examples of that? Because there are definitely companies who maybe they'll be a little bit away along their journey, and then they'll be able to say, no, actually, this is what we are. So like Drinkly describing themselves as a tech company.
Exactly.
But that's been a business decision they've taken. Exactly. There are others like that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So I'll think of the inverse of that. So a company that didn't need to create their own platform, but and decided to use something else. There's this community, a paid community called 10X community. So it's about it's a lot of makers are in it. A lot of people who run
Growth
their own
hackers,
SaaS,
right?
Growth hackers, SaaS business owners, and others. And it's a community to get advice, share resources, all that kind of stuff. And it's an expensive community. It's a paid community to get to. So they use Slack, and they decided to use Slack because it basically ticks as many boxes as they can. But they actually pay for Slack, so they get all of the different features. And they just work out behind the scenes how to make sure that everything works. So you get
use
charged.
integrations.
Yeah, they use a different, I don't know, Recurly or something like that, a system to charge you your recurring fee. They go in there and make sure that your account is active, and that's how they run it. So they are taking kind of the lean approach in extremes of like they don't have technology that they have to maintain. They don't have to educate their users about how to work a brand new thing.
All the customer support.
Exactly. Exactly. So there are things like that like you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel, especially when you're trying to just articulate that the problem exists. And I think a lot of people forget that. You don't necessarily need to articulate that a problem exists by building something that solves the problem. You need to articulate the problem exists by articulating that the problem exists. So if you're saying, oh, okay, we want to do this community of knitters, and there's nothing out there that's going to work, I'm going to prove it to you. We're going to try and do it with Facebook groups, and it's not going to work, and you're going to see that. And people are going to get really pissed off.
And is it the classic example of why go in the process of building lean as an MVP is Henry Ford asking, if you asked people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses, they wouldn't have said cars.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
It's the whole idea of building a plank and then building a scooter and then building a motorbike and then building a car and then building a rocket, rather than saying, well, I thought that you wanted a car and it looked like this and it looked completely different from what you wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess it builds on the discussion we had just half an hour ago. You might have had the idea and think that the all singing, all dancing should look a certain way, but if you risk skipping MVP and going out and building it, are you then going to have to work backwards and unengineer something to say, well, this is actually what the need was?
And on the face of it, we are doing exactly that.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
We're doing
the opposite
this week.
Yeah.
And we're conscious of that, don't worry. So just a couple things, like what we're not doing, or what we're not trying to say this week, is that anybody can build what it is that we're building, and get to where we are over the course of the week. And we're also not saying that we literally showed up on Monday morning and didn't know what we were building. In order to make that happen. So we're not trying to be magical about things. We have done a bit of prep work, about a month worth of prep work, and no development has been made. But what we did at the very beginning was, when we knew we wanted to do this, we started to say, well, who do we know? And who could we convince to help us out on this? Yeah. And then we looked at the talent that we had available, and we said, all right, we're going to design something that's going to make the best use of time and best use of that talent. So like Ben has experience building SaaS products and building them very quickly. So it's natural, and he had time, and he was interested in the problem that we were looking to solve. So we were only able to develop, and we are only able to develop what we're developing because Ben's involved. If he wasn't involved, we'd figure out another way of trying to validate the problem. Yeah. But we're just taking advantage of what's available to us, if that makes sense.
Definitely, and I think maybe it's worth describing a little bit more, especially from the conversations you've had this week, of the maker's mentality.
Yeah, exactly. So like I was talking, you'll hear it, I think you'll hear it tomorrow, a conversation with Cortland Allen, who started the Indie Hackers community, which is a very successful community of makers, people that are just trying to make things.
Who built their own platform.
But interestingly, he talks about what it took to build that. And when I asked him, like, what ways do you see people validate products that are maybe innovative before actually making something? This guy definitely identifies as an indie hacker himself. And his response was, well, to be honest, just make it. Just make the thing and see if people use it. And that's actually not... Yes, that's a lean startup in some ways, because you are not going out of your way to spend a lot of resources to build something. But it also flies in the face of what some people would advise you to do, would be to not build anything until you have the data backed, the data to back up that there is a problem that you need to solve. And so this kind of maker mentality that you're talking about is also what Ben certainly feels. If you were
identifies, right?
Yeah, if you were listening,
he was like, build
last
it.
night, he was like,
and people will use it.
I don't have time to validate things.
Which is why he gets his stuff done at the speed that he does.
Exactly. But it's
a balance and a risk, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And certainly with Condaba, it's been the opposite experience in terms of like what we've tried to do, and it means that we're probably a lot slower in some ways. And we have fewer features, and we're maybe not building at the speed and the pace of other companies or other ideas. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
So I'm interested in where, because I think this gets confused quite a lot, of how does funding and revenue map on top of the idea of lean MVP and build and test? Because I think that in their core, and to be purist about it, they don't have they don't say specific things about where you should get your funding or how you should get it. But often lean MVP is seen as, well, you're spending absolutely no money and you're bootstrapping and you're developing super fast. And build and test, well, you're getting to revenue, or you're potentially putting a lot of your own money to make that happen.
Yeah. Which is similar.
How useful is that?
It's similar. And I don't know. I mean, you talk to an investor, and investors, if you say, well, what does good look like? They'll usually say something like, well, it's showing that you can get results and grow very quickly. And up until that point, it doesn't really matter if you made the thing yourself and were kind of trying to experiment with a whole bunch of things for several months, a year, whatever, and then suddenly you figured out, your focus. The investor doesn't really care about that. They only care about what it is that you're, the stage that you're at right now. And so I think sometimes we can get a bit caught up with trying to figure out the story of, we're going to launch this thing and in 2 years it's going to be massive and everybody's going to use it, and then you get obsessed with that thinking.
So I think because one of our aims this week is to pull back the curtain on the realities of startup life, I think that's a really important point to discuss, is that these labels and these names and what you call them and the fact that they're experiments might all be things that you plan and execute beforehand and you know that I'm running an experiment, or they might be something that you do, you look back on, you reflect and you say, oh, I learned something from it. And actually when I do speak to investors or my team or customers, I can say, we tested this.
Yeah.
I think
gives you confidence.
Well, also the way you shouldn't worry if you're thinking, well, I'm not like a lean MVP purist, or I'm not completely in the maker community. I think the reality is an absolute blend, and it depends on the skill sets of the people that you're working with. It depends on the problem in front of you. It'll depend on the time that you have and your mentality, and also the funding that's available. So I think in reality, we'll probably do a blend. It'll probably look a bit messy, but you'll be able to start articulating and using these frameworks to be able to describe, well, actually, this is why that was important. It's why I validated something.
Yeah, and also you'll talk to people that I guess maybe you will assume are very knowledgeable about a certain area, but they've never built anything before.
Right, so someone who could have read Lean Startup, Lean Entrepreneur, and they could tell you how you should do it.
Exactly.
In reality, could you do it that way?
Yeah. Well, maybe you could. Like, someone will talk to me and say, oh, it seems like you've been developing really, like you've been taking a long time to develop things. This thing could be whipped up in a weekend. And you hear that and say, oh yeah, okay, maybe it could. Maybe, this is talking about Condaba, right? Oh yeah, maybe you could make a basically your own social network with advanced kind of user permissions, webhooks and live chat, and make it scalable so that 100,000 people could be on there at the same time in a weekend. Maybe you could do that. Like maybe you have that kind of experience.
But then it comes back to your values. Why are you building what you're building?
Exactly.
We wanted to build a company that was a community where people agreed with our values, where they were team members, they weren't contractors. Those were all decisions, business decisions.
Exactly, and maybe it slowed us down.
Yeah.
And I certainly fully admit that. And we could, we also...
Well, fast isn't necessarily best.
Exactly, and we haven't hit product market fit yet. So who knows? Maybe those folks are right. But I think what's important is that someone who hasn't been there will always have to make assumptions. You do that too. Everybody does that, right? If you haven't been there, you're like, why isn't this as easy as it is? And the answer might be because the person who you're talking to doesn't know what they're doing. It also might be that you don't know what you're doing. But it also could be that things are just a little bit more complicated than that. And instead of kind of dwelling on to whether or not we did an MVP in a day and had 100,000 people sign up to a mailing list versus taking a week to to build a product that maybe 5 people will start using. Like, business is a bit messy, products are a bit messy, and if you can be okay with that, which I'm kind of getting to that point, but I'm certainly not there yet. If you can be okay with that, you're far more empowered to fail fast.
Right.
You're far more empowered to, and actually understand what that means and learn from it. But it takes a while, and certainly if you're not from that kind of mentality. Josh Pigford is another conversation that you'll hear tomorrow.
Barometrics, right?
Barometrics. So he started Barometrics, which is a $1 million company, a really interesting SaaS product, and he talked about how they created a product, they fully created a product, launched it, and then a month later decided to scrap it. And they did do a lot of work. They did a lot of this research, talking to the customers, and built it. And at the end of the day, they decided to scrap it, not only because they didn't see the conversion that they wanted to, but even though there were potentially routes that they could take to make it, put it into revenue or whatever, they didn't want to spend the time changing it because they had a specific vision. So they were thinking, you know what, if it's not going to work this way, we don't really want it to work at all. We don't want to spend energy. Let's move on to something else. And I think that talking to him, I was asking, like, well, what goes into that? Like, how can you have that? And I don't know. It just seems like because he builds so much stuff, he's like, it's not a problem. We just move on. And you watch that, and I don't know. It just seems this kind of Zen, incredible set of state. Being. Yeah, exactly. That I wish I could get into. But
I think something that has been true for the incredible founders that we've spoken to this week is that it is complicated. That even just the markets are complicated, the products that people are building are complicated, the challenges that we're facing are complicated, and that is the reality of it. And it is going to look messy, and it's going to feel messy, and people from the outside are going to give you advice and tell you what a lean MVP is, or that you should just jump straight into build and test. But you can only do what you can do. You can do what's in front of you. You can do what you're capable of. You can do what you're supported to do, and ultimately that's got to be the right thing.
Yes,
it's all you can do.
Exactly, it's all you can do. So I hope you've enjoyed us kind of ranting and raging a bit about this. I don't know, it's not really rant and rage. And tell us what you think. Like, what do you think in terms of how we've gone about this, how we've articulated it? I think that we certainly could be articulating it a lot better, but by its nature, the fact that we're doing this so quickly means that we're, you don't realize your blind spots until you realize them.
And you also don't know what you've not said out loud. So things that we may have articulated between the team and worked out that we've not said out loud. So definitely, ask, challenge, what have we done? What about our perspectives, and what are we missing? If
you've been watching this, you probably understand what it is that we're building. And when you got your email last night or the night before about the product, you were like, oh, okay, I know what they're doing. But a couple of people hadn't, and they wrote back and they said, you know what, it might be a good idea for you to actually tell me what the damn thing is.
Classic. We're like, oh yeah, we've been talking about it all day. Weren't you there?
So
you mean briefing room? Yeah, okay.
Okay, you mean what it is? Oh, great. That gets back, that's the fundamental thing. Oftentimes when talking to founders as well, you ask them, like, what is it? They launch into this, and I'm guilty of this too. Yeah. They launch into this thing, oh, well, it's this and this and this, and this is the background and all this stuff. Let me take you back to the Stone Age and all this stuff. And at the end, you're like, okay, cool.
But what is it?
So what is it? Oh, yeah, it does this. Okay.
And it's hard. Like, that takes practice. And you meet people who can do that seamlessly, and they stand out because that's really unusual.
Exactly. And I find it's much easier to do it for other people.
Right. You can describe someone else's business.
Hey, so this is hey. So I hope you enjoyed that. We're gonna just take a couple minutes because we're gonna set up the pre-recordings that we made earlier.
We have Chris coming up.
Yeah, we have Chris from Landbot. I don't know if you want to preview it.
So he actually doesn't go into too much detail about Landbot as a product, but what he does do, which is going to be really interesting after what we've just discussed, is talk about their 3 business model iterations. So where they started out and why, and how actually their customer segment led them in another direction, and how that led to them raising 2.2 million. So that's what's coming up next.
Cool. All right. So
we're
gonna fade out because we're doing it live. I'm gonna plug the computer back in. This is what we're gonna do.
You can put these on mute too.
And then